I would like to call to order the Tuesday, November 19th meeting of the Monmouth City Council and ask Phyllis Bowman for our roll call, please.
Can you hear us, Councilor Belts?
I could hear you, John.
Here.
No, he's out there.
Here.
Here.
I'm present. I just want to make sure. Councilor McKeel, can you hear us in the room?
I can hear everybody, but I can't hear Phyllis, I think.
Okay. All right.
But I'm here.
Great. Thank you. And Councilor Carey, will you lead us in the flag salute this evening? That brings us to our consent calendar, and tonight that includes the minutes of the council meeting of October 15th. Unless there are additions or corrections, I would entertain a motion to adopt the consent
I
calendar.
move to adopt the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilor Salinas Oliveros for the motion and Councilor McKeel for the second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And opposed, seeing none, thank you very much. All right, we will move on to public comment. Tonight we have a very dense agenda, including a public hearing. So I am going to take the comments that came in tonight. It looks like we have 5 of them. We'll just take them in the order. And tonight we are limiting those comments to 2 minutes apiece so we can move on with our agenda. So when I call your name, please come up to the desk and you'll need to push the button on the microphone so that the light turns red, which means on, not off. And you will have 2 minutes on the timer if the clock master here. Get a basketball coach to run the timer.
Time out.
And when you come, please be prepared to identify your name and city of residence. First this evening, Jody Russell.
My name is Jody Russell, and I live in Monmouth. I'm here to encourage the City Council to select city staff to be the decision maker on HB 3395 emergency shelter applications and to ask that public comment be in writing. These are my reasons. It's clear we have a homegrown homeless population and that many of these folks would take a path out of homelessness if it was available. See the homeless prevention and data sheet that I will provide. These are people currently working with the FCO who are literally homeless, sleeping on the street in a structure not fit for human habitation, in a tent encampment, in a car, a boat, or an RV without hookups. And these are all in rural Polk County, not including West Salem. So, secondly, an application has been submitted to establish a transitional shelter. The organization seems to meet the HB 3395 criteria, and they have funding for a site that does not come from local budgets. The organization has identified a location for the shelter and has secured a lease contingent on city approval of the shelter site. State law, HB 3395, provides limited criteria under which applications for emergency shelter can be rejected by a city. with regard to oral public comment. It's often emotional, divisive, and often lacking in facts. These public comments are often viewed as fact without investigation by members of the community who have a predisposition to believe the worst. Written public comment can be investigated before being assumed to be true. It can be taken under advisement and used to craft guidelines within the law that can be used by staff to make application decisions. Please consider taking option 2, a limited public comment period, a written public comment period, and designate city staff to be the decision maker for emergency shelter applications.
Thank you. Two minutes. You see the button there? There you go. Maybe.
My name is Jason Myers. Mayor and council members, thank you for your service. I just have some questions about how this process works and what we're looking at doing here. Can you explain, and these may be answered as you go on through the evening, so can you explain what input the public can have during this process? Who are the people that the shelter is trying to serve? Is there a specific need they are trying to satisfy? Is there a vetting process for the people in the shelter? Are there requirements for them to remain housed there? How many are proposed to be housed there? And how will the overflow be handled? Those are the questions that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Yeah, we are not going to answer any questions tonight or hear any testimony regarding the actual proposed shelter in Monmouth. This is for us to only talk through the process because we have a couple of options there. So those questions will not be answered tonight. That's not on our agenda. So, but I do have, you've provided a phone number, so we can get back to you with more information when that's available. Okay. And Diane McBurnett, again, talking tonight, we are only taking input on the process that we would consider for discussing the homeless shelter. We're not discussing anything else regarding the proposed homeless shelter tonight.
Good evening. My name's Diane McBurnett. I've been a resident of Monmouth and Independence for 40 years. Can't believe it. Currently in Monmouth. When I moved here, D. Taylor was holding court at his drugstore and Kreider's was still open up the street. I'm here to talk about homelessness. Years ago, I saw a man on a street corner and a sign that said, "I am not an addict. I am not a criminal. I am not mentally ill. I am not a bum. I just need help." I wondered why he felt he had to tell people who he was not in order to have some help. This set me on the path to volunteer with Family Promise Program, which helps families who are homeless regain housing. I've been volunteering there for 10 years. Our community is seeing an increase in homelessness. I constantly see posts on the Independence Monmouth community pages asking for help in finding a place to live that is affordable. For example, we are fortunate that the leaders in Polk County understand the root causes of homelessness and have worked hard to build foundations of care for people. The last link in this helping chain is to establish transitional housing for people to live in on their way to being fully housed. I support transitional housing projects for Monmouth. I remember one family we took care of at Family Promise. The father lugged a TV into the shelter, which was a church. He asked for DVDs for his TV. I thought, why in the world is a guy who's living in his car lugging a TV around with him? In the evenings, he said, after the kids do their homework, we watch movies. It's our family bonding time. You bet I went through my movie collection to find what kids' movies I could. Harry Potter, Superman, all of the good ones. They loved them. Half of our population live paycheck to paycheck. Half of us live paycheck to paycheck. Homelessness stalks them. We have opportunities to change that, and I hope we do so. The one thing I've always loved about Polk County and our community here is it cares for others. We are the first to jump in to help someone in need, be it human or animals. We can extend our helpful attitudes towards unhoused people. They are our neighbors, they are our family, and they are citizens of Polk County. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. All right, and this next one, Pam, but I'm going to ask you to keep your comments to the process. And you mentioned a couple of specifics about the shelter proposal. We're not discussing those tonight.
I guess it's still on. Pam Burkhalter, I live here in Monmouth, and I've been reading over your instructions and what you plan to talk about today. So I do have questions. One of my first questions is anybody on the board actually go out to the neighborhood of where any homeless shelter is going to be to see who the people are that live in that neighborhood? I make this comment because the place on Stadium is right next door to several homes that people live that have to be cared for, and they move about. So there's a concern, there's a safety concern there for me. I live right down the street, so
This sounds like it's specific to that shelter. We're
It's-
not really
it's
taking
not-
comments on that tonight.
it's
So
not just that shelter.
you're speaking about a specific location, ma'am. And
Okay.
we're not taking comments on that particular shelter tonight. So we will have that opportunity for you. We're going to discuss tonight what that process will be and how we will receive your input. So once we decide that, then you'll be able to submit your comments that way, okay?
Can I ask a question about health services?
No.
You're not going to answer anything. That's
Yeah,
true.
we can't answer that tonight. We don't have any of the information specific to the
Okay.
shelter yet. We haven't
All right.
received it as a council.
I'll give my time, what's left of it, to Priscilla Kinnon. She should be next. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. We have your contact information here. All right, Priscilla Kenneth.
Say this one to me. Let's get back. Against your rival, West Division.
And hang on just a second. Looks like we have someone on the line with their microphone on, so we want to. Mute that so we can hear. Okay. Thank you. And same thing, Priscilla, specific to that particular location or application, or we don't, aren't taking information or questions about that tonight.
My name is Priscilla Cannon. I live in West Monmouth neighborhood, and I heard the first part of what Jody said, and I believe that not only should there be a right to written, but also verbal. I believe that in a process, it's our constitutional right to for everyone in your due process and our due process, that it's not fair for a panel of people to make the decision for all of Monmouth without the right of us to come forward to share facts, to share thoughts, to share what we've immersed ourselves in for the last 18 months. So again, I think that think about that a lot of West Monmouth residents are elderly and don't want to come out on a rainy, windy night. And so I've had people calling me. They don't want to come, but they could very well be watching me now. and listening to you. So we do want to make sure that we have possibly consider a forum that, like we had a year and a half ago, where you can have residents, make it more formal, and so that they can come up and have 3 minutes to discuss their wants or their fears or their challenges or what this might mean to their community that they've lived in for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I've lived here for 32 years, and so I think the process for the council needs to consider the need that more people do want to speak. It's their only way to communicate. Some people can't sit down and write a 500-word essay of what this is or isn't established, of what you're going to put in this city. Thank you.
Thank you. And Angel Swanson, same discussion about the process. Thank you. The microphone's still on there if you want to sit in front of it.
Hi.
Thank you.
So I want to comment on process, and oh wait, should I start? Oh, okay. So I'm Angel Swanson. I live in Monmouth, and I have a couple kiddos, and I love this town. It's really wonderful. And the whole conversation around the shelter, I think, is great, and it's rich, and it can be a long conversation, but I'm really, really, really concerned about process and expression and opportunity to build on information. What really concerns me as a member of the public who's super interested in addressing safety concerns and super interested in addressing real issues is the consistency of repeating questions over and over again, even though they've been answered several times. And that just clogs everything up. And so when we talk about constitutional right for expression, it can't be constitutional right for rambling and repeating questions over and over again. Because as a member of the public with limited time, a full-time job, and 2 kids, I can't wade through the repetition. I need an FAQ, guys. This is nuts. So when we talk about writing things down, I mean, there could be a middle ground here. Like I'm not really great with writing things down myself. I'm an auditory processor. You know, I'm neurologically special. I guess we call it like neurospicy. Like, so I like to talk with my hands. I really like talking about things out loud. And I want to allow for people to have that opportunity. But we have to be able to hold ourselves accountable to not waste each other's time saying the same things over and over again. If someone's asking who's going to be in the shelter, that's been answered like 1,000 times. I mean, I don't really have a horse in this race. If it is not safe, I don't want it. But I can't get to the facts about whether or not it's safe because all I'm getting is a lot of emotional repetition. I want to call to try to understand, hey, so what are the concerns? And then I have 30 minutes of a call with somebody talking about a hypothetical person who has fentanyl issues. And when I'm like, but I want to know what the safety protocols are. So it's not about constitutional right to waste my time asking the same question over and over again. I have a constitutional right to get to the facts. So if we're going to have a conversation, the conversation has to be additive, it has to be cumulative, and it can't be this alternate facts crap that I keep seeing out here. We need to hold ourselves as a small town accountable to the truth and verifiable facts. It can't be, it's not safe, someone with fentanyl is going to, kill me in my sleep. That's not real. Like, what's real? I want real, and I want it to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. All right, thank you very much, folks. And again, after we go through the process this evening, we'll be letting everyone know how we will proceed to hear for our sakes about the application, since we don't have the details, and let everyone know. Our first order of business in this evening is actually meeting with our planning commission. And I see we have some folks here and online. I'm going to call up Suzanne Duffner, our Community and Economic Development Director. We've got Steve, we've got Tom, we've got Holly, we have Donna online. Oh, and Holly, I'm sorry. Right here on the front.
All right. Hello, Council and Mayor. There are a few of us here from planning tonight, along with Suzanne and Carter, to give you an update on what we've been up to for the last year. In terms of specific land use decisions we've been working with this year, there were 6. We had 2 sort of housing related things come across our desk. One was an expansion of the Riddle Road Apartments north of Western. They're adding an additional 46 units. which hopefully will help with housing in town, as well as the Phase 10 of Edwards Edition came for. Sorry. Sure thing. I'll get a little bit closer to the microphone and maybe that'll help us. Okay. So we've had 2 housing projects come to planning this year. One was an additional 46 units to the apartments north of Western Oregon University, and the other was the next phase, Phase 10 of the Edwards Addition subdivision, which is an additional 17 lots there. We had a design review with what's called the Monmouth Cultural Center. People know that is the historic bank downtown and the adjoining buildings. They're getting restored, their facades are getting restored to the historic design, and the interior is being remodeled into a theater and a restaurant. We also had a couple interactions with Western itself. They had made some minor updates to their master plan that needed to come back to the city, and they had a sign variance that they needed approval for. And the other sort of specific land use thing we did was the discussion around a boardwalk through wetlands in the park near MES. As far as non-specific planning work on the economic opportunities analysis, which looks at our commercial industrial lands, has gotten underway this summer. That's continuing. I think there's another meeting tomorrow. There's a couple of us from planning on that, along with everybody else, all the other stakeholders in town. The transportation system plan is also in process, and we've had a meeting with Public Works to provide our input on that. Staff has given us a couple of education nights. We had one update on the accessory dwelling unit project process, the support documents and things the city's been doing to help homeowners add additional housing to their land. And we also had a night talking about all of the land and housing related legislation before it passed at the state level. And then, of course, we've also been working on draft updates to our code that we're required to do by the state around which sorts of decisions need to be staff level versus council or commission level. And that's in the midst of what we're doing right now. Beyond the TSP and the economic opportunities analysis, I don't know if our planners have anything else in store for us next year, but we're keeping decently busy.
Yeah, that's a really great overview. Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Finishing up the economic opportunities analysis, certainly a big one. Getting back into, I think, our housing production strategy and kind of looking at our next step for implementation, since that's also a council goal, will be something we'll want to get some input from the commission as well. So yeah, trying to stay busy and hopefully encouraging more housing to be built. So yeah, thanks. Did you have any questions of the commission that you'd like to ask?
I don't see any questions. It feels like we meet with you almost as much as we meet alone this year. So we really continue to appreciate the work of our commission. And we don't have any openings, or we do?
Yeah, it's a fully staffed board.
Commission.
So yes,
All
we've
right.
got a great group of commissioners. They dedicate a lot of time. There's a lot of reading of materials and laws they have to stay up to date on. So I really appreciate it. We've got a super group and very, very discussive and kind of some good decisions. So
Yes, we appreciate that. And as we will discuss coming right up about how much we appreciate letting you continue to do some of that work. So thanks. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
thanks, commissioners on there.
For being the liaison and attending meetings with us, being the bridge between the two groups. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and it's an easy one to attend because you folks work well together, and it's targeted and seldom longer than 60 minutes, which is a wonderful target for a committee of any type. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
All right, and that does take us to a public hearing to be held on Legislative Amendment 24-01. which would amend our Monmouth City Code related to limited land use review procedures. Again, a sort of a state mandated discussion we didn't necessarily plan to have, but it's upon us. So Carter Craig from our planning department will fill us in.
Hello, yes, I'm Carter, and do we start off reading the script and that introduces the staff report? So, ready to begin the hearing, I believe.
I will do that. This evening, we have a public hearing on legislative amendment 24-01 to consider amendment of the Monmouth zoning ordinance, which pertains to a number of, wait a minute, is this an old script? Just a minute. That one says 23-01. Hey.
Would you like my copy real quick?
Yeah. I reprinted it as well. I'm not sure it has the right one. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Sorry. This evening, we have a public hearing on legislative amendment 24-01 to consider amendment of the Monmouth zoning ordinance, which contains a number of revisions and restructuring of code chapters that pertain to housing, commercial, and industrial development and land use procedures. The City Council will receive testimony at the close of the public hearing, and at the close of the public hearing, will make a final decision whether to adopt or not adopt the proposed amendments based on the complete record, including the testimony received at tonight's public hearing. These proceedings will be recorded. This hearing will be held in accordance with the land use procedures required by the city and the state of Oregon. This is a type 4 legislative procedure. For anyone wishing to speak on this issue, we are asking you please to use the speaker cards provided. When called upon to speak, you must be recognized by the chair. You will state your name and city of residence for the public record. So before we begin, does any counselor wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest in this legislative matter? Seeing none, I will now open the public hearing for legislative amendment 24-01, a zoning ordinance amendment, and ask for the staff report, please.
Hello, my name is Carter Craig. I'm the community planner for the record. And as Mayor mentioned, this is something we've been talking about. The council voted to initiate these changes back in September. They're in response to a piece of state legislation, Senate Bill 1537, which does a number of things. One of the things relevant to what we're talking about here tonight is it takes types of land use actions, it terms limited land use decisions, and it changes the law so that a public hearing is no longer allowed. In our code, those limited land use decisions correspond to the subdivision, major partition, design review, and non-conforming use review application types. So the amendments before you, they've been seen at workshops with this body as well as with the Planning Commission. Last week, the Planning Commission voted to recommend that the changes that are presented to you here tonight are adopted. The changes, as well as in addition to reclassifying those 4 application types from our Type 3 classification to a Type 2 classification. It also designates what the appeal authority would be in each case, as well as who would have standing to appeal in the case of an appeal. Those are the broad outlines. There's a sample motion on page 8 of your packet. I'm happy to receive any questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Looking online as well, Councillor Obers.
Just to make crystal clear, we just went through our development ordinance last year, and then the state turned around and said, oh, that's nice. You need to make these changes. And we don't really have a choice of whether we make these. The state is insisting that we do. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
If I may, in fact, if you don't make the change, then the state law will override the city code and you have to follow the state law anyway.
So even if we don't want to, it's going to happen no matter what. Okay, thank you.
And there are valid reasons. We're trying to streamline land use process to help housing production, housing affordability, all those things. So there were some valid reasons for it, but yes, it's a lot of extra work to get there.
I do not second guess the legislature in this. It's just odd or something that after the years with our own zoning ordinance that we invested huge amounts of time and effort at planning and here to change it, and then it gets changed again on us for us. So that's all.
Timing is everything. Any other questions of staff? All right, seeing none at this time, then we will take testimony from anyone in the audience who would like to discuss this legislative amendment and the proposed changes to our zoning ordinance. I don't believe anyone signed in to speak. And Phyllis, I don't believe anybody online was here to speak on this amendment.
Not that I know of, Mayor Coons.
All right, I will then close the public hearing. And again, there is a motion, or we can discuss among ourselves. Councilor Salinas Oliveros.
I move to approve legislative amendment 24-01 and proceed to first reading of ordinance 1418 and an ordinance adopting legislative amendment 24-01 to Title 17 and 18 of the Monmouth zoning ordinance relating to subdivisions and partitions and zoning.
I would
I'll
second
second that.
I am going to give the motion to Councilor Salinas Oliveros and the second to Councilor Obers because he got in there first. So any other discussion? Councilor Carey.
There's a couple things that the audience might be unclear on this. There's been considerable discussion about this, not only in an attempt to comply with the legislative changes that have been made recently, but also in the interest of, the governor's intent to really attack the whole affordability thing, affordable housing. This will streamline the process and allow certain portions of our code to be responded to quickly without hearing notice and a lot of things. And they're minor in nature. If there is an appeal to them, that would be in the cases of the areas we're talking about, that would be appealed to the Planning Commission. There is a provision in this for a difficult decision that would, have a lot of public interest, for that to be called up directly to the council. So the council could serve as a deciding and certainly as an appellate body. So this is intended to streamline the process, make it easier for developers, and still protect, our codes and our processes. One thing I will note is that it puts it increases the responsibility and authority of our city planner. And because they'll be able to make decisions without going to the Planning Commission on sort of low-level things. I think it'll be important for the council as we go forward to communicate our development philosophy. So it's clear and it's not, we don't have a rogue city planner, but there's a city planner that has at least heard the positions and sort of the position that the council has adopted. This is a good thing, in my opinion. I'm a development guy, so it's a good thing that we move forward, but it is not so tilted that there aren't checks and balances still in place.
Thank you. All right.
I do have one more question, and this is a question I should have asked it earlier. Was the development community engaged with this? Were they notified that this was going on? Are they aware? And if it were to prevail here, will they be notified as such?
That's a great question. We haven't done any formal outreach. While we've been working on this, we have just as other business had conversations with some of our developers, and this has been, as we do pre-apps, we've talked about how this change is coming. So some portions of the development community are aware of it through us. I would imagine that there's maybe some broader awareness, and especially those who are interested in building housing. They might be aware of this change. But to your point, I think there's some follow-up education with those who regularly use design review, especially to let them know that process is different.
I think it would be wise that we just sort of make a tickle note that when we have things like this that are involved, that are detail involved, I mean, it sounds like you're talking in tons, but the development community understands that and would have ideas on it, for, against, modify here or there. And maybe not specifically on this, but on other things like that. I think we need to engage them. If we're really interested in making their life easy, so to speak, to get through the process, they ought to help in crafting the process.
Okay, and Councillor Obers for a final comment.
And I'm going to take a guess, Councilor Carey, that many of the developers in the state were involved at the higher level at the legislature. And if they weren't directly involved, they've heard it through the development grapevine, what the orders down from the state are. And they would be remiss in their business if they haven't been paying attention to this. So.
Yeah, they have pretty good lobbyists. All right, I will then take a roll call. No, because we'll take the roll call. So, nope, I would just like to see a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve legislative amendment 24-01 as submitted to us, please signify by saying aye.
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 And I note Councillor Belts and Councillor McKeel online also voted aye, so that leaves none opposed. So we will move forward in this case, no changes being noted, with a first reading of ordinance number 1418, an ordinance adopting legislative amendment 24-01 to titles 17 and 18 of the Monmouth zoning ordinance relating to subdivisions and partitions and zoning. All right, so thank you for that. And Carter will be back for a second reading and adoption at our next meeting. So thanks. And thanks again to our planning commission who also went through all of that with us. So, at this time then, I would like to invite Susie Marston, our city finance director, to come up and give us our first quarter of fiscal year 2025 already. Gosh. Okay.
There we go. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. Susie Marston, Finance Director for the city. I am here tonight to present to you the first quarterly financial report for fiscal year 24-25. This is a new format that I came up with. I tried to keep the same elements that were being reported in prior reports in this report, but with it being new, I do welcome your feedback and comments, and if there's anything that you wish you would have seen in here or whatever you want to tell me, I'm open to hearing. So with that, I will just go through this. So on page 27 of your packet is where it begins.
I started off by discussing the change in fund balances, the overall financial position of the city. And overall, the overall financial position decreased only by 0.5%, $104,000. And to break that down, I picked out funds that either increased or decreased by more than 10% and explained it. The major fund, the general fund, had the most significant decrease. And this is simply because we don't receive property tax until November, but we still have our ongoing expenses to keep up with. So that wasn't a surprise. But I would report that I can see our property tax collections to November 22nd, and we are at 84% of budget on that, which is on track. And then that also is true for the tax incremental funding that comes through urban renewal. That's at 83% of budget as of now. The MINET and PERS debt service funds both increased significantly, and that is because MINET paid their debt service well ahead of us paying our debt service on their behalf. It's due the end of November, so you'll see that level out in the second quarter. Same is true for the PERS debt service funds. That fund collects revenue allocations from the payroll paying funds, but again, the debt service payment doesn't happen until November, so we're just collecting the revenue ahead of time. I went on, the water and the stormwater funds increased by 13% and 18% respectively. This is just representing the amount of user fee revenue that we collected over the operating and capital costs. In the water fund, we were able to utilize about $82,000 of ARPA revenue, and without that money, that fund would have grown by 7%. The transit fund and Swinson funds were also fund balances that grew by more than 10%. And this is just simply the interest earnings that were earned during the quarter. The transit fund, that's what funds our trolley. Those expenses are covered by it's SFLRS funding, it's COVID money. And then in the Swinson fund, we have no expenses budgeted coming out of there. So that is all interest. We did bill for the public safety fee on the October 31st billing. The amount we billed was about $42,000. $1,700, that's the 985 portion, and then $1,700 is sliced off to go to Polk FCO for that assistance. And those numbers line up with what we projected during the discussion of when we were looking to establish the public safety fee. So moving on to page 28 with capital projects. During the first quarter, total capital expenditures were nearly $829,000. 45% of that is attributable to Monmouth Recreation Park. Phase 1 of that project is complete. I've listed some details on the progress of each of the projects. I'm sure you all have seen the pickleball courts. Marion County Well Project is out to bid. We expect that that'll be under contract in December. Safe Routes to School project is moving along with a completion date of around January 2025. The fuel tank and software replacement. The fuel tank's been ordered. Delivery is expected in December. The transportation plan update, a final rough draft will be coming to council in January. We did order a replacement backup server. We have those at the police department in late August, and we expect that that should be here anytime. 40 to 45 day delivery was expected. Power and Light replaced a vehicle with a 2024 Chevy Colorado and sold two. Proceeds of $15,600 went back to the fund. our EV charging station located in the parking lot. We're just waiting for ADA improvements, and that should be put into service mid-December. As far as interest earnings go, our total interest earnings for the first quarter are roughly $280,000, which is 12% higher than what we earned this time last year. I've been communicating, and you've probably been seeing the interest rates are falling. In September, they dropped by 50 basis points, and most recently by 25. So in percentages, that's 0.5% and 0.25%. And we budgeted for that. So we've got that. Cash on hand, September 30th was roughly $21.6 million. Okay. And then what follows on page 30, I included a table that shows for each fund the budgeted beginning fund balance. That's where we projected at budget time where we would start. And then it's compared to what we're actually starting with. It's important to remember these are unaudited numbers. Overall, our projected beginning fund balance was higher. So we're starting out with more than what we projected overall. And then you'll see as you work across the resources that were collected through September 30th, the expenditures, and how that impacts the fund balance, showing that the change right now is a negative 0.5%. So not much change. And then on page 31, this is the page that you're used to seeing in green and yellow. I wanted the numbers to speak for themselves. And so at September 30th, we're 25% through the year. And so that's our measure. So you'll see that these general fund revenues that I have listed here, property tax, marijuana, state shared franchise fees, and fines and forfeitures, with the exception of fines and forfeitures, they're all under 25%. I've already talked about property tax. In November, we're at 84%. Local marijuana tax and state shared revenues and franchise fees, those are lower, but they are tracking with last year. A lot of it has to do with a lag due to the timing of when we receive those payments. Local marijuana tax, we can expect to decline anyway, as well as state shared revenues, consistent with what the LOC is projecting. So that's where we're at right now. Department expenditures down below versus budget. These are all the general fund departments. For the most part, every department is right around the 25% range. Some are higher, but we have higher expenditures at the beginning of the year, insurance, memberships, dues, that kind of a thing. I do apologize. The amount you see in the non-departmental debt service, the $46,745, there's $15,000 of that in there that actually should go to police and library, which will make that change. I apologize. I discovered that just not too long ago, but we will fix that. So that puts police at 28.3% and library at 23.7%. So not too much of an impact. And then the next page, again, more of the green and yellow, just shows where we're at with the special revenue governmental funds, building, street, tourism, Minette, and urban renewal. Building revenues are tracking almost identically with last year at this time. Expenditures are under the 25%. Street fund, we're lagging in Surface Transportation Act funding. That doesn't come in until January, so that's going to be lower. And then also we have a transfer of $65,000 waiting to come from the transit fund into street to cover the trolley storage building. Tourism revenues are up, and that's largely due to an AARP grant that the city was awarded, and that money was used to improve the alley next to City Hall. And I already covered the Minnet Fund. Urban renewal, the TIP funding, as I said, is 83% as of now. There was a small grant that was paid to Sing Fe Restaurant for $3,300. And then we have the normal allocation of staff support for community development. And then what follows are the charts you're used to seeing for the general fund revenues and expenditures broken down by category and department. And then on page 35, a summary of our interest earnings and cash balances. And then after all of that, the details for each fund. So that concludes my report, and I would welcome any questions or comments.
Everybody's looking closely. Counselor Carey.
This was a lot of work for a first quarter check-in. And thank you for it. I guess I would wonder, if you're looking for feedback, not necessarily on the dollars specifically, but on the format. To me, it's a little bit early to start worrying about ending fund balances. I mean, we're a quarter in. And so to look at, especially with the timing, some of the revenue streams come in and some of the expenditures are made. So I don't know, and it's probably calculated with a push of a button, but I didn't find that particularly compelling after the first quarter. So that could save you any, unless somebody else thinks, man, I'd love to see that. And what I found the most beneficial, and I really appreciate it, because you boiled all of those spreadsheets at the bottom down to the performance at a glance.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was good. And the explanation that you provided under each one of those was good. Because we all look for that 25% in the first quarter and 50 in the second and 75 in the third. And if there's variance on that, that's when we start getting heartburn. But you explained that with your bullet points below, behind that. So I thought that was good. That both the revenue and expense charts, I thought those were really helpful. And Oberst wanted the smiley faces, and he's missing that. Yeah, he's missing that. But anyway, that's my feedback, and I think, again, in first quarter, I mean, we just need to make sure we're off to a good start.
Yeah.
Let's not worry about what's out there 9 months.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we may all come up with more specific feedback like that to Susie that we can give individually via email. So I have some other thoughts too, but not things that need to be done tonight, but other general thoughts about it. Yes, Counselor Salinas Olivero.
Yeah, thank you so much for this information. And I appreciate that you explained some of the discrepancies in the general fund. You answered my questions as you were going through the report. So I really appreciate that. It's extremely thorough. And, if we can help you out to make it a little simpler, but it looks really good. So really appreciate your work on this.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, in the interest of transparency and all that. So it's good.
All right. Don't see any other questions. So, Counselor Oberst is thinking something.
I find that I'm kind of a visual guy, and I like the various candlestick charts you threw in, because that's a visual, instant hit for me. I don't have to search down columns to figure those out. So I can do without the smiley faces, John. Even though Tom is here tonight, who brought us our smiley faces many years ago. But yeah, just having those graphs is a useful piece for me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, thank you.
Counselor McKeel had a question. I'm seeing it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I would just like to say thank you for the update on the percentage of the budget that has been used up. That actually, for me, and I've never worked with really large budgets, when I have worked with one, it's really nice to know where you are in relation to the year. So having that like right around 25% was very helpful. So I appreciate that information. That's a nice addition.
And my favorite piece of information in here is the information about Minnet, because I was sitting in the center seat when the heartburn was going on many years ago, and it is wonderful to see them succeeding at the level at which they are succeeding now. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, quick, before they think of something else.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, and we have another ordinance action, and I see that, once again, Carter Craig will present to us a potential agreement for a right-of-way encroachment.
Yes, thank you. We are considering an ordinance which would authorize signing a right-of-way encroachment agreement with Western Oregon University. It's a similar sort of agreement to documents that this body has with Hoffman Estates recently, as well as with the dining seating areas in some of the downtown. Similar sort of legal document. It is to enable Western Oregon University to place a building identification sign for the Welcome Center in the right-of-way. This area is in the north side of the right-of-way of Monmouth Avenue, right by the Welcome Center, the former OMA building on the north end of campus. It's currently lawn. It is right-of-way just because of some of the eccentricities of how that part of the town was platted, but it's not used as a transportation facility, so there's no negative impact in that regard. It required a sign variance from the Planning Commission, which it received last month. The Planning Commission found that there was hardship because of that right-of-way change right by around where, between the Richard Woodcock building and the Welcome Center, the center line diameter grows about 5 feet. So pushing back the envelope where a sign could be placed. So there's a hardship there where a sign would be less visible from the road. To ameliorate that hardship, the Planning Commission granted a variance. Here we're considering signing the agreement that would allow it. That's the nuts and bolts. The next step is to consider authorizing that ordinance.
Counselor Salinas Oliveros?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Carter, for bringing this information. And so am I correct in saying that the sign would not encroach on the street? It won't, with visibility, it won't affect any of that with the drivers. Is that correct?
You're correct. It will be over 10 feet away from the sidewalk, 10 feet to the north of the current sidewalk, so it won't impede on anything. It's located far enough away from the intersection with that. It's not an official right-of-way, but that bypass that goes around and ends up by Rice Auditorium, it's far enough away from that intersection that there's no vision obstruction issues.
Counselor O?
I can't tell from the photograph that you've provided, but Monmouth Avenue, is there a left turn lane to turn left onto Stadium if you're northbound on Monmouth? The reason I ask, we've got so much right of way there. If this sign, as indicated in that photo, is going to be in right of way, we must have enough right of way there that if we ever do need to add a turn lane or another lane 40 years from now, we've got right of way sufficient to do that, right?
I'm not familiar on the required dimensions there, but I believe it's a 80-foot right-of-way there.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like a lot.
I think the nuance there is the center line veers west slightly there. And so if you go back to the Woodcock building, you know, that's oriented to the sidewalk. And then as you move to the north, then, and that center line moves to the west, then, you know, you can still move in, you can move it to the west and without impairing anything. And to your point, if there's any difficulties that come, I think there's something in the agreement that the university would, you know, resolve any, I mean, if they had to make the change, that would be their expense. This was well vetted by the staff and by the planning commission.
This is just a first reading, so I don't need a motion at this time. Counselor McKeel, do you have a question or a comment?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
All right. I would like to conduct first reading of Special Ordinance 1417, an ordinance authorizing the city manager to approve the installation by Western Oregon University of certain improvements within the Monmouth Avenue public right-of-way and granting an exception to the provisions of Monmouth City Code 12.10.160 and 12.15.050. And that will come back to us for further discussion. All right. And now we have our library director, Chris Dobris, to talk to us about an ordinance we reviewed last time, changing some of our library charter ordinance. So thank you, Chris.
Madam Mayor, councilors, thank you. I'm here for the second reading of the ordinance 1416 revision of Library Board Ordinance 1292. Staff recommends adoption of Ordinance 1416 repealing the Library Board Ordinance 1292. You can adopt the revised ordinance, do not adopt the revised ordinance, or send it back for further revision.
I move adoption of Ordinance 1416, an ordinance repealing Chapter 24 of the Monmouth City Code and replacing it with the provisions of this ordinance relating to the Monmouth Library Board and repealing Ordinance 1292.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councilor Salinas Oliveros for the motion and Councilor McKeel for the second. Any other thoughts about this change? Councilor Carey.
Just for the members of the audience, this is a cleanup of language, modernization of some of the language in the library, the ordinance, and it modified slightly and provided a little more flexibility for the role of the library board members. So this is an improvement and modernization of the language that is embedded in there.
Correct.
All right. I will ask Phyllis for the roll call, please.
Aye.
Yes.
Councilor Belt.
Aye. Sorry, I can't hear Phyllis.
Aye.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. And that brings us to our work session. Does anybody need to take a 5-minute break? Yep. Oh, okay. We are going to take a 5-minute break. Sorry, Suzanne. Thank you for getting settled in, but just make it quick and we'll be right back.
Oh, for the, yeah.
You gotta keep it tight.
Okay, we'll reconvene. I see Counselor Belts has returned, and we'll wait for Counselor McKeel to check in. And there she is. All right, thank you, everyone, for your patience. You're very welcome, sir. And that takes us to our work session, starting off with that discussion of the citing process for under House Bill 3395 regarding emergency state action for homeless shelters. And we have a plethora of great advisors here tonight. So we've got Suzanne Duffner and Carter Craig from our planning department. But we also have a couple of our attorneys here because this is a process that is outlined quite a bit through state law. So we want lots of good information and input. Appreciate everyone being here for that. So go ahead, Suzanne.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor, for that introduction. The name is Suzanne Duffner. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Monmouth. And I'll be giving the staff report presentation for this work session on the House Bill 3395 emergency shelter application process. This work session is specifically about determining the decision-making process for citing of an emergency shelter using the state law, the HB 3395 process. So there's really two questions that the council needs to determine that the focus of tonight's work session and on is that those questions include, should there be a public hearing? And who makes the final decision? So we didn't present you with the specifics of an application. We're not getting into the merits of an application tonight. We are simply just determining, will there be a public hearing and who makes that final decision? Is it the council or staff? So just want to be super clear on that. There will be opportunity to dive into all the criteria. We do have an application for a House Bill 3395 emergency shelter siting application that has been submitted by Church at the Park. It's currently under review by staff, but we need this step to determine kind of the next step of how we're going to take that public input and again, who's going to make that process. So I just want to make sure that was clear. By way of background information, HB 3395 is a state law that governs siting of emergency shelters in Oregon communities. It has a couple of precursors, so it's not the first time this law was put into action. It actually had I believe it was House Bill 2000 or 2006, if I get my numbers right, yeah. That was the precursor to this. House Bill 3395 made 2006 permanent. That doesn't have the sunset on it. So, but it uses the same approval criteria, and it really limits local governments on approving these to just looking at very limited 6 criteria. That mostly pertain to public health and safety types of criteria to consider. It does specify qualifications of an operator of a shelter, so we'll certainly be reviewing to make sure any application meets those. But again, that will be a future staff report and findings to look at the details of an application as applied to that criteria. In terms of the House bill, it doesn't prescribe a particular public review or decision-making process. It does not require a HB 3395 application to have a public hearing. It doesn't specify who makes that decision for the city, so there is some local control on in determining those particular items. The local appeal, there is no local appeal of these decisions, though. They go straight up to circuit court. So again, it's very, very limited criteria. And if the city were to, for example, deny an application, and that it's not based on the merits, the criteria, and the city were to be challenged on that at a circuit court, we would be responsible for any of the attorney fees, not just for ourselves, but also for the appellate. So that was written into the law to make sure that cities were really just applying the criteria to these types of decisions. So we've outlined some options in the staff reports on how to proceed with answering those two questions. Certainly have the option to conduct a public hearing and receive oral and written testimony through that process. We typically notify the 250-foot boundary. One thing to point out, these are not land use decisions, so the law has made that clear that it's not following the land use process. A second option would be to provide a written public comment period. So this is where there'd be some open period where folks could, usually it's for a period of a couple of weeks, where they're able to submit written comments before the decision is made. And so those could be taken into consideration. And typically in those cases, that would then be a staff level review. And then a third option is no public hearing or no public comment, and staff making the decision on that. So that's, again, that House bill does not require, because this is not a land use decision, does not require that public input. And during this process, it's supposed to be limited to, again, the review of whether or not it meets the criteria. So there is a sample motion in that when you're ready. I'm sure you have some questions. There's a couple of attachments to the staff report. We included the attachment of the actual House bill language that we've been reviewing with our legal counsel and looking at examples from other communities that have applied this. We're not the first community to receive one of these applications or the precursor HB 3395. The attachment to is our application form, just a blank one to show the information that we collect when we receive one of these applications. And it's very similar to a number of other cities, kind of don't reinvent the wheel and keep it really focused, laser focused on what those state criteria are. So with that concludes my staff presentation, and I'm happy to help answer any questions you might have about this.
And I have a question. Again, we have members of our law firm, Sherman, Johnny and Hoyt here, and I know Lane particularly, you're on a listserv with other city attorneys. Have there been discussions as cities have tried to review this law and or Justin might have information.
Sure. Yeah, the several cities have been looking at this. They've taken different approaches in terms of the process, but it all kind of comes down to the same. It's almost ministerial. Either the statutory criteria are met or they are not. And whether that decision is made by staff or by council, it's the same substantive question. Basically it's either the boxes get checked or they don't. I don't know. I haven't seen a consensus in terms of the questions of public comment or how that is taken. I haven't seen any consensus on that level.
There's really been no conversation about this on the listserv. Just hasn't.
New enough.
No, not really, because House Bill 2006 goes back to 2018 or no, even before that maybe.
There was even one before that, 4142, I think.
Yeah, so it's been this has been around for probably about six years or so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, but that was the second iteration. There was one even before that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Councillor Carey and Councillor Salinas Olvera. Then Counselor McKeel.
One of the things that would help guide me in deciding how this is best, procedurally is going to be best resolved is you know, to ask a few questions that might direct, you know, where the decision would be made and the degree to which comments could be made. I've been unable to, and I'm a little bit wondering about the title, emergency shelter. Now, emergency suggests it's an immediate, urgent deal, and at some point it's resolved. Is there, and I know there's no sunset on the legislation, but at what point does it no longer become an emergency?
So the statute defines what an emergency shelter is. Despite the title, the definition is really more, the term is temporary. Quote, emergency shelter means a building or cluster of buildings that provides shelter on a temporary basis for individuals and families who lack permanent housing. So there's not a quote emergency criteria that's really part of the statutory definition, notwithstanding the title of the law.
There were, in the statute itself, there were a number of references to, you know, optional services, and I guess we'll get to that, so never mind that one. I did have a question about it within the statute that again would have some bearing on this. It refers to additional services that may be provided to individuals, not to exceed $300 a month. And I couldn't really figure out the definition, and I'll get it to you. You know, I have a hard time doing the citations here, but near the bottom of listed page 8 there, and it talks about provide additional services not described in section 3 of this section to individuals who are transitioning from unsheltered homeless status. I don't know where they're transitioning to or from, clearly. And then the organization providing the services may charge a fee of no more than $300 per month, and only clients who are financially able to pay the fee and who request the service. You know, one of the things that's unclear, and that may be in the application, but who are those people that we're talking about? Are those the residents, or are they people from outside that may come in and receive services from time to time and then go away to wherever else they live?
So in terms of the statute, you know, it could be a little more clear on that. I think two things with that. I would read this as referring to services provided to the people being served by the shelter. Interestingly, the way this is written, that section, the subsection 4 there with the additional services, that's not part of the same section that lists the criteria for approval or not approval. It's almost like a throw in as here's other things the shelter may or may not do. That is outside the list of specific approval criteria. Here are the things that if they meet these things, it shall be approved.
The last question that I have, I think, well, two, and I'll make them quick. Is it permissible, would it be permissible to approve this with conditions? And an example of the condition might be require the operator to contract with Brant Sanitary Service to have solid waste removal on a regular basis. Now, that's probably going to happen anyway, but I know that's a concern. Would that be appropriate?
I think if you add criteria outside of the enumerated criteria in the statute, that starts to get on some dangerous territory. I mean, the application itself and the discussions with the applicant, there may be representations about what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. As I understand, the application has some plan as to certain things they're going to address. I think if the approval is framed in a way that adds criteria outside the statute, I think that that's starting to create an issue as to whether the decision-making process is adding criteria that are not among those listed in the statute. This is not a land use decision.
No, I understand.
It's very much, here's your statutory criteria, they meet them or they don't.
And if the applicant were to agree to those, again, just making sure that what's said is done, I guess is the thing. And there's more to be discussed on that and so forth. Final one, is there a process by which an approval can be rescinded?
Interestingly, I don't see that in the statute in terms of a process for that. I would have to look into that if they come out of compliance with one of the factors. I would think there's a way to address that. But again, the focus is just on the statutory factors. They meet them or they don't in terms of the application approval.
Councillor Salinas Oliveros and Councillor McKeel.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Councilor Carey, for some of those questions. Reading through the application, it is pretty specific of what has to be added to the application, the narrative statements that includes 3 bullet points, attaching documents. It's pretty thorough to show that whether it does or does not meet the criteria. So my understanding is this is step 1. And we have to get through step 1 before we can continue a conversation or ask more questions about whether, if they meet the criteria and where we go from there. And that's my understanding, that this is step 1, and then we can discuss more in detail or more questions after that.
In terms of the way the statute is written, it's about approval or not.
Okay. No, and I understand that. So that's really where we're at right now, and then deciding on who makes a decision, and because if it's approved or not, then that's when we know whether or not we move forward.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor McKeel, and I have a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm actually, I noticed when I was reading the law about how we would be responsible, or the city is responsible if this is appealed. Thank you, Ms. Duffner, for bringing that up. And I think it's been an interesting conversation with us trying to figure out where is the law, which really leads me to think that this needs to be with staff, the lawyers who really understand what this is about. So we are not tripping into mistakes that that we've actually already started talking about. But I was kind of curious. I think Ms. Duffner mentioned that there were some cities that had already decided to have the staff make the decision. Do we know what cities those were? Are they cities like us? Or maybe we just know that there were cities who did that and we don't know them specifically.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Thank you, Councilor McKeel, for that question. Well, we haven't done an extensive outreach to every community that's approved one of these. We did do some quick research and then just what we're hearing through our planning listserv. And there were, I think, 6 communities that we found approvals for, ranging from Eugene, Bend, Florence, Tigard, Madras, Salem, that have approved some version of either HB 2006 or HB 3395 since 2020, I believe, was the first ones that were being approved. And it appears that all of those actually have been made by city staff, either community development director or the city manager. Most of these were before HB 3395 came along and clarified that cities could elect to have a public hearing. So I don't believe those cities actually had any pre-notice or hearing associated with those decisions. But I will say some of them, sorry, I just wanted to clarify one more thing because it did mention some of these were actually city-owned properties or city sponsored shelters. And so in those instances, there was the local government, the county, the city that was going out and doing outreach on their own, even though it wasn't required to those neighborhoods.
Councillor McKeel, did you have a follow-up?
No, I was saying thank you. That was very clarifying. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And so that's a good point because, in fact, as you say before, there wasn't even an option to have any public input at all. I remember that was a change as they were going through that. And my next question then, I think, if I may, is, so some of these are going to be pretty easily determined by staff, and I guess my question maybe for our attorneys is things like, will not pose unreasonable risk to public health or safety. How do we determine, like, that's a pretty broad criteria, and I'm not sure how either staff or us would be able to assess that. What kinds of things, and I think, Lane, you know legislators, and maybe you've all been talking about sort of what's the intent of that. We hear a lot about people concerned about personal safety and safety of their homes. Is that the kind of thing they're talking about?
I did a little digging and I don't see a lot of clarity in terms of, I mean, it almost looks like a catch-all. Here's what I'm pretty sure it's not referring to, though. It can't be referring to just the fact that it's a shelter. Because if it was, that would defeat the whole point of the law. I mean, I think I read that as kind of a miscellaneous. If there's something particularly unique about a particular situation, maybe, but I don't think there is any reading of that, of the, public health and safety that could be broadly about the fact that it is a shelter, because if it was, that would subsume the whole, all the rest of the criteria. I don't know, Lane, did you have any more insight in that?
No, it's funny. Justin and I had a conversation at about 5 o'clock about that very question. And there is no guidance in the statute, but I think we do agree that it needs to be a particularized question of safety to the site or to the proposed shelter, and not just a general sense that homeless people are dangerous. So I think we agree that whatever it is needs to be something specific and particular about this application, about the site that's proposed.
In terms of the ambiguity there, it's not even clear what, I mean, it could be something where it's dangerous to the residents. Is it, is the site itself unsafe? It's hard to read that.
Okay. Ma'am, I'm sorry. No, ma'am, I'm sorry. This is not the opportunity for public input. We have to be able to speak to our legal counsel and our staff and make this decision. They're talking about an interpretation of the law. We understand your concerns. We've heard them for the last 18 months. We need to understand that our legal obligation and where we are going to go with this process. I'm sorry, your input is not welcome at this time. Please let us continue our discussion. Councilor Roberts.
So I'm looking at the staff report, and it looks like we really have two decisions to make. And the first one wraps around public input, oddly enough, and whether to have any, whether to have written or whether to have some form of hearing with oral testimony. And then the second decision is who makes the decision. I feel that over the past 18 months, we've kind of made a promise to the citizens of the city that we'll hear their concerns in some forum. We've heard, we had a town hall at one point. We've had a number of opportunities for people to comment, but I feel like we still need to have some form of comment. I share the concerns that were raised at the beginning of this meeting around oral testimony. And while this isn't a land use decision, it follows that pattern of here are the criteria, address the criteria. And while I've heard a lot of concerns, I haven't heard a lot of concerns that address the criteria. And this is, look, I was chair of planning 20 years ago, and I've been through a lot of land use hearings. And when people object to a proposal, there's a tendency to not address the testimony to the criteria. I would hate to be before a judge who didn't look at the criteria of the law in my case and instead applied something completely outside the law. And that said, so I think written testimony tends to be more focused on those criteria. That said, I feel like we have kind of made a commitment to hearing testimony. It's not an easy choice to make. It's going to call upon people who come to give testimony to be disciplined in their testimony, to focus on this list at the beginning of this report of 6 criteria that are in the state law. And if it's not one of those criteria, it's not something that the decision maker can consider. That's what's hard about this kind of decision, is that people are invested in it, but they may not be able to apply the standards of the decision with their investment. It's often not easy to do. Oregon's land use planning system is full of opportunities to address things, and it's so hard to address the criteria. It's always so hard. But that's what I would urge. If we go the route of public testimony, I understand the passions around this. I do understand that. But staying focused on what our decision-making criteria are is how we get to the end of this process at some point. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McKeel.
I know I went abroad on that, and I appreciate you allowing me to do so.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Oberst. Those are really good points. And I think with those points, in looking at how we need to focus on those 6 criteria, and I think it's important for people to get that into writing, because the oral testimony, as we saw with the person, I'm assuming, who spoke out, because this is such an emotional issue that people are very worried about, and oral testimony can really very quickly move away from that focus of those 6 criteria. Where if we have a written testimony that people provide, they can clearly talk about those 6, keep themselves focused in that, and we also then can collect, without the emotion of a public hearing and people charging each other up on this, we can collect these sound, reasonable comments from people and have them considered, rather than having a supercharged public hearing where it just plays off. And we've seen that happen already with this topic, is that it just ramps it up. Versus if we have the written testimony, which provides people's concerns about those 6 criteria without ramping it up.
Councillor Belts, would you like sharing thoughts.
I don't know that there's a whole lot more I can say that has not been said. Can you hear me all right? You can hear me okay? All right, good.
Yes.
I definitely agree with Counselor Obert in that we have told people all along we're going to give them opportunities for feedback. I was certainly there 18 months ago when the community came in, and I agree with Counselor McKeel. It got ramped up pretty quickly, and we lose sight of the criteria that we are legally bound to follow. And so I have mixed feelings about another public hearing. Certainly giving people the opportunity to write, addressing the criteria specifically that we're required to address. It also lets people. I mean, nobody has to write a 500-page essay. People just need to look at the criteria and address their concerns based on that. I also feel that definitely city staff and legal counsel are the ones that have the most expertise in this. And the decision we make now, granted, it could change later, but as counselors change, knowledge changes, and we're going to have, some changes in a couple months and then probably more changes in 2 years. I just feel like city staff are better prepared long-term to address the criteria and address then the application. Does that answer your question, Mayor?
Yes, thank you for weighing in. Counselor
Thank
Terry?
you.
At the risk of being somewhat redundant, and I hope hopefully not too much, not only have we committed to a public process on the consideration of this, but this is one of our council values, the community engagement, and this is a classic case of community engagement. I think that it's unrealistic to expect that, be it written or oral, that all comments will only be directed at the 6 criteria. Some of these are binary. Yeah, they've got sleeping quarters. Okay, who's going to argue that? I mean, that's there. That said, there are some legitimate concerns and some legitimate issues that we have heard so far. I went back through my notes from 18 months ago, and some of the same things that we heard over, at the town hall, are the same things we're hearing now. So they're real, they're embedded. This would allow us a public testimony, and written to a degree certainly as well, to note what those concerns are, and then determine whether or not there are what things that we might be able to do to assuage those concerns. Now, it's still a question as to whether or not there can be conditions applied, but even if they're not, some of the things that we've heard might be able to be addressed by our nuisance property ordinances. And perhaps that could be beefed up to the point where if there is concern about litter and garbage and that sort of thing, we've got a strong ordinance that could deal with that. Perhaps on-street parking, if you're worried about visitors coming, or if you're worried about mobile homes being lined up on the stadium. We might be legislatively, code-wise, we might be able to address some of those. So that would allow those to be noted. It would also allow the opportunity for some education, and we've gotten some done tonight in terms of what the real limitations are and how we are the decision parameters that the city is provided with. So I think there's an opportunity for that. I would hope that if we did have an open and public hearing, that the applicant would present sort of their plan. And I think it would be important to get them on the record for what their plan is. Now we've got something against which to measure their progress. It may be contentious, it may be emotional, it may be all of those things, but, I think it's important that we get, with as much clarity as we can get, what the concerns are, and are there things that we can do to allay those concerns? And that might have to do with, health and safety. It might have to do with nuisance property. I don't know what all they are. I mean, I do, but I don't want to voice that. So I would be in favor of a public hearing. And for that matter, I think that there's a lot of things where there's a lot of staff expertise that's required. And we appreciate that and rely on it. It's been described to us that this is pretty ministerial. I mean, you check the box and you move on. And, so and there may or may not be much of a decision to make, but, we're the elected body. I mean, in effect, the buck stops with us. So I'd be happy to suggest that we are the ones that ought to be the deciders on this. I can be convinced otherwise, but to me, that's both of those are important deals.
Counselor McKeel, then Counselor Salinas Olivero.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I agree with Councilor Carey on quite a few numbers, particularly that this is our city value, that we take input. We want people to be participating in government. I think having written testimony is still that participation. And what I think written testimony, what that gives us is an ability actually to get more of people's real concerns and not what happens. I think when people start talking, and it was brought up in one of the statements very early on this evening, is that we can move very quickly to misinformation, and that kind of spreads and permeates as it ramps up. And so my concern is, by having public testimony, we actually aren't getting the comments that we would have if people were sitting down and writing and looking at this clearly, instead of getting concerned about all the things that they're hearing in this meeting that may or may not be accurate. And so that's what I'm thinking is we actually would get better information from folks if they were to write it down and submit it. I think and again, I think it was Councilor Belts that said you don't have to write a 500 word essay on this. You can you can do something pretty quickly about the concerns that you have without hearing what somebody else is saying, becoming fearful, and then reacting to that fear from somebody else, but not from your own thoughts about what you're thinking with that. I also think regarding the staff versus the council, just our very short conversation and having the lawyer continue to guide us, no, wait a minute, come in, no, wait a minute, come in. I really think the staff is going to be very capable of doing this, and because this is their experience level, like Councilor Belt was saying, and I think the stakes on this are pretty high for us not to come in and make a mistake here, because we could wind up paying the fees when it goes up to, if we do it incorrectly, it goes up to the court. So I think we can get much better testimony if people are able to think logically, write down something and send it in so that we can actually see what their concerns are. And I think the staff can do that very well.
Thank you, and Councilor Salinas Oliveros and Councilor Obers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, clarification, if the application meets the criteria, are we under the obligation of this House bill to move forward if it meets the criteria? Would we get in trouble if we say, no, we don't like the application even though it meets the criteria? Can you explain like what our responsibilities are in that sense? Because I think that will determine whether or not how we go about getting public comment.
If it meets the criteria, then it needs to be approved under the statute. It's the policy decision of what circumstances require approval has already been made. That has been made at the state level by the state legislature. And so if it's approved, then that's that. In terms of, there's been some reference to it, but in terms of what happens if you get it wrong, it depends how you get it wrong. If you approve and it is appealed and found that it shouldn't be approved, there's actually not a penalty for that. The penalty is if you deny improperly. If you deny and it's appealed and you lose, then you have to pay the other side's attorney's fees. The attorney fee is kind of a one-way attorney fee provision where there's a penalty for denying and losing on appeal. But the reverse, if you approve and you win on appeal, you recover your fees. But if you approve and that gets flipped, then you're not liable for the other side's attorney's fees. You're only liable if you deny.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And am I correct in saying that depending who makes the decisions, we have to make sure that the application meets the criteria? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, I would much rather have the staff who reviews thousands and thousands of applications and understands state laws and statutes to review this application instead of the council being responsible to make sure that the application meets the criteria when we don't have the expertise to do so. That's one point. I agree as far as public comment. I do think to start with written comment so that we have in writing, understand concerns, understand what meets the criteria, but also have questions. There are some really good questions tonight that I think would help give us the opportunity to answer if it were in writing. And because if the application is approved, hypothetically, we will have, I like the opportunities for like educational sessions, because to me, that seems really more valuable for that community connection where people can come, ask all those questions, talk about their concerns, have the people who are responsible for this application there to be able to answer those specific questions and help the community move forward from that. Because if the application meets all the criteria, we have to move forward anyway. So I think we will have opportunities to have educational sessions to answer all these questions, to have the people who are directly involved to be able to communicate with our citizens about what's going to happen, what are some of the procedures, what are we going to do about, keeping things sanitary? Can you explain, the safety concerns? And that way we have something a little more solid and a more conversation than having public comment that we've taken for several months. I think we've heard a lot, but maybe we can actually address these comments in an educational session to where maybe it won't explode, or we can address directly the fears with people who have the answers. I feel like as counselors, we don't have the answers, but the applicant does, and they should be involved in those conversations. So I would be more inclined just to do step one, get this process moving, have our staff, because they have the expertise, to really go through and make sure that the application meets the criteria, open up at least a couple weeks of written comment so that we can gather all that information, questions, and concerns. And then if if the application gets approved, then we can have these educational sessions and conversations with our community. So with the experts who are the applicants, who have the answers, so that people feel like it's addressed. What I don't want is misinformation and our community to think that we can have a public hearing and because of their concerns, we deny the application. We can't do that. If the application meets the criteria, we are obligated to move forward. Now, where do we go as a community? Now, let's educate, have these conversations, answer your questions so that neither side gets, in trouble for not following the statutes. So I guess that's where I stand on those.
And before I recognize Councilor Oberst, I have another sort of application process question. I know in land use hearings particularly, city gets input from police, from Power and Light, from Public Works, from our fire department, right? Our fire marshal. Will that process still be a part of the application that would be the full application package that would be considered?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kuntz, for bringing up that point. I neglected to mention that in my staff presentation that yes, even though this is not a land use decision, we would still very much follow that practice of doing a public agency comment period where we send out the application to the local fire department, to our police department, to our public works department, our building department, and our power and light utility. So then give them an opportunity to review and comment because yeah, we certainly, there's criteria that talk about public safety and emergency response. Fire and police are experts, or resident experts on that and helping us draft findings to address those criteria. So absolutely, we will have public agency comment to get input from the various agencies. Even though we've had a pre-app, we've started some of those conversations. There's a dual application process right now for a change of use through building department, and they're also getting review from different agencies. But yes, in terms of the House Bill 3395 application processing, there will be requests for comments and findings from those agencies included as part of a staff report. So, yeah, and that would happen regardless of whether staff made the decision or whether council made the decision, because we certainly, even when council is making decisions on development applications, we give you the information and draft findings, and that research is part of that decision-making process to keep it as focused as possible and based on those facts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great, thank you. And that's what I was trying to determine. Again, thinking this through, once you get what is considered a complete application, it will have all that information. So then, before we take public input on the application itself, we would want to publish that, make that available, that completed application packet. Then however we choose to take testimony, we would give folks time to read it, to review it, be addressing real specific things within the application, and then be at a decision point, right? So that's where I see that. And then if we did have an education session, would be potentially either before the decision is made, right? Say, these are all of the concerns we see. These are some of the things we know would be addressed. These are some of the things that we can have further discussion about, and then make a decision, whether it's staff or us. But we don't have months and months to do this. I assume we have to be fairly responsive once all of this is completed. There's no legislated thing, like we don't have a land use decision, so we don't have X periods of time. But we need to make this decision for everybody involved and figure out how we can address concerns that are brought forward, even if we cannot put legal conditions on it. So Counselor Obers, thanks for indulging my question.
So I fear I misled earlier when I kind of indicated that we had a choice between verbal testimony or written, because as you noted in option number 1, we could conduct a hearing that includes both oral and written testimony. And to my attorneys, could I put a deadline on written testimony such that council would have that in hand far enough ahead of time that we could review it before a hearing?
Yes.
Thank you. So that's the first thing, as I would say, it's not an either or. We could in fact take both. The second thing I'd like to note is that I trust the residents of this city to come to an understanding of our process that we have no choice but to follow by state law, of following the criteria, hearing testimony wrapped around those criteria, addressing their comments to those criteria. And if people start to drift away from that and start providing misinformation, it's very straightforward for our mayor, who can be very stern when she wants to be, to say, that's off topic and you're out of order to go down that road. Please restrict your comments to the criteria. It's also, I have found, I was, again, sitting in the center seat, we had a very contentious land use hearing with probably in the old volunteer hall, 50, 60, 75 people in attendance. And I asked that people listen to what other people said. And if somebody else already said it, don't say it again. Don't flog a dead horse by telling me 15 times the same piece of information. It's sufficient to say what he said, and we'll get it. Because I also have faith in this council to be able to hear testimony and read testimony and come to an understanding of that testimony. I have faith in this staff. We are not going to be, if we had a hearing, we would not be walking into it. If we are call upon ourselves to make a decision, we would not be walking into it without the expertise of staff in hand. Staff would be there in the form of a written report. Staff would be there to answer questions as they came in during a hearing or a decision-making process, to help us address the criteria of state law and not to wander afield, because it's the criteria at the end of the day that we have no choice but to pay attention to. So, you know, I just, the idea, and it concerns me, the idea of having a decision made and then an opportunity for comment, because that's kind of the horses out of the barn. We need to, if we're going to hear comment or read comment, that all needs to come in ahead of time before a decision is made, because to do otherwise is, I believe, it would be a disservice to the residents of this community. We need to have an opportunity to have it all out on the table ahead of time.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was trying to outline. Counselor Salinas Oliver.
So again, I'm going to try to clarify. So if the application meets the criteria, we are obligated to approve it. So if we have a public hearing and the application has already met the criteria, then the public hearing is hearing concerns, questions, but it really can't make the decision to overturn the application if it meets the criteria. Is that correct? I guess what I'm trying to understand is, are we going to waste everyone's time in thinking that your testimony can change the decision of this application that has to go with state statute and state laws and it meets that criteria? Or what? So I'm trying to understand. I'm not opposed to the hearing, but I'm wondering if it's going to make a difference at that time. Because once that decision is made, if the application meets the criteria and we're obligated to make that decision, we still are open to having those sessions with the community to address all those concerns and questions that we got in writing or when we have these educational sessions. But I'm just worried that it's going to be misinterpreted that your testimony is going to change the decision. Does that make sense? Am I wrong about that? I guess I'm trying to understand what our obligation is. I'm really murky about that.
If I could just briefly, that you're saying the decision is made. Well, if we take a staff report, that is a staff opinion. That is not a staff decision. We could hear testimony that leads us to come to a different conclusion.
But if
And
the
we could come to a different,
application
we could
meets
come to a different answer than staff, because
is
I
that
trust
correct?
this.
Because if it meets the state statute, the application, are we not obligated by law to
At
move
the
it
end of the
forward?
day, it would be our determination.
So I think the short answer is if the statutory or criteria are met, you have to approve.
Without condition. So I think, Counselor Obers, what we're saying then is, and I tend to agree, I hate to say we're going to have a public hearing, we're going to hear all this input, and then at the end say, but that didn't count because it meets the criteria. Now, our decision about whether or not it meets criteria, that's what we're here to decide. And I'm about ready to ask for a motion on this, whether you feel, as we feel as a group, that we trust the staff to make that decision, or whether we want to take that on ourselves. We're all looking at the same criteria. We may have different interpretations, as you say. So I wouldn't consider any staff report I receive from our professionals an opinion. I would consider researched, informed, professional opinion and guidance to us, because so much of the stuff we talk about we are not experts in, and as mentioned, they are. So I don't think it's just their opinion, but I would say that, again, this process to me would be an application is considered complete. It is received, it has all of the information, it has all of the outside review. That application is published without a decision. That opens a public comment period, whether that is in writing, potentially in writing. That public comment period then is closed, given time for whoever is making the decision to review all of the public comment. And then we have a meeting to determine, to announce the decision, whether whoever is making it is making it. At that point, if we want to hear public testimony again, right before we announce a decision, that's not right. If we want to have a public hearing with verbal testimony, when the application is received, folks won't have had a chance to review it necessarily. So I'm not seeing where that fits in, other than we'll make a decision and we'll discuss some of the mitigation things or some of the things we'll be looking out for. Again, they're not called conditions. We can't call them conditions, but what do we already have in place? Councillor Carey mentions them. We have noise ordinances and nuisance ordinances. We have ways to be able to address current issues in our community, and sort of talk through what those might look like would be maybe what that education session is, I guess. Councillor McKeel.
Sorry, too many buttons to click here. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm ready to set, to do a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
I move to direct staff to process HB 3395 applications in accordance with option 2 which is a written comment period, with the final decision made by the city staff.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that the comments received, once a completed application is available, that would be published. We would then have a written public comment period. At the end of that, whether there's additional public education or input, staff would be making the final determination on whether or not this meets the criteria. Councillor Carey.
I will speak in opposition to this and be a no vote on it, because I'm concerned about in a public hearing, we would have the applicant, if we follow the land use procedures, they would make a presentation in terms of what their program is going to look like. And that would be the value of that. That would put them on the record. Otherwise, it's just simply a written document that's turned in and evaluated carefully, but not necessarily on the record to the public. And anyway, so if we wanted to hold them to account, I think we put them on the record.
Thank you, Councillor Salinas Oliveros and Councillor McKeel.
I agree to having the applicant come, but again, if the application meets the requirement and we're obligated to move it forward, we would still have the applicant, whether it's during the decision-making or afterward, answer those questions. Because again, I'm just concerned that if we don't meet our obligation and the application meets the criteria, are we just wasting time in getting to what may or may not happen? And I still want the applicant here. I still want that opportunity because I want them to directly address questions and concerns. But it seems a little futile to do it when we have to approve an application if it meets the criteria. Does that make sense? Does that make any sense? I'm not opposed to that idea. I think we need to have them here. But I think if we have to move forward anyway, then maybe they make their presentation after that because we're obligated to move forward and give everyone the opportunity to understand what's going to happen, to have their questions answered, to address those concerns. Am I misunderstanding that because we would have to move forward anyway?
You're directing that to me? Yeah, if the criteria are met, then the criteria are met and you have to approve.
Yeah, and Councillor McKeel's next, but I will say too, again, trying to keep lines fairly clear and our boundaries clear, I would hesitate to have a lot of discussion about, I agree about having the applicant say, these are the things we're going to do. It's not part of the application. So anything that comes up in that kind of discussion before a decision is made could be deemed as us, or be possibly seen as us trying to put conditions on. And that's what makes me hesitate a little bit about that, Councillor. That's the only thing I would hesitate to say, hey, let's hear all the mitigation, all of the potential things, and then announce our decision and make it seem like we had. I'm gonna call on Councillor McKeel on it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, on Section 3 of the application, it provides very clearly the role for the applicant to outline in a public way. You know, so you're concerned, Councillor Carey, with they have to be on the record. is right there in section 3, where the applicant has to have a narrative that describes best practices. They have to have a plan for emergency vehicles. They have to talk about, I think I remember reading it earlier today, there was something about safety. So all that is in the plan. So it is public record in that this is an application that was submitted to the city that very clearly puts the onus on the applicant to make sure that they are making a strong case about those 6 criteria. And then once that application is submitted, then that gives the public something to look at to say, oh, and in fact, it might do this. Oh, well, look, they've got it right there. I don't need to worry. They've got this covered. Or maybe they might not, and they might be worried. But the applicant has then the onus to make sure that the point is made. And it is a public record.
It's a public record without any questioning of it. It's what they submit to the public. I would be interested, and you know me, I'll have questions on their report.
But I think that goes back to what Mayor Kunz was saying, that the discussion back and forth would put us in, it could very quickly put us in a very tricky light or a tricky situation where it looks like we are trying to do negotiation or mitigation. I think this is something that needs to be done with professionals who do this. This is not it's not a land use hearing. This is submit the application. We don't even have to have the public hearing according to what this law is. All the applicant has to do is make the case clearly, period. That's it. And then the staff have to say, okay. I think we're taking more in that, Ms. Duffner said we're going to talk with the police department, the fire department, the different departments. And then with that, we are also having the written testimony of the people in the city. So it's kind of the wraparound effect of looking at this application. But I think the application provides the clear public statement about what this project will be.
Yeah, I didn't even notice there that, because I've been reading other parts of it more thoroughly, that it requires a budget. So there's some pretty thorough things that have to be part of the application, even though it's not a criteria for decision making. It's information we are gathering that we can hold them accountable for in a way. All right. Any other comments or questions before I call for the vote?
And I would agree with Councilor Curry that I would appreciate an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. And I understand the arguments about, if we get a written decision from staff and then ask for public comment, I do think there's certain value in letting people speak.
All right, then you will now have an opportunity to vote on exactly that question, Councilor Olvers. The motion is to provide a written public comment period, and then at the end of that, have the decision be in the hands of city staff. So because we have online and folks, I will ask each of you to vote in. All those in favor, please raise your hand for me. Thank you. And those opposed, raise your hands. The decision passes 3-2. We will, in fact, then develop the written process explaining how we are going to get the application, declare it complete, publish it, offer a written comment period. At the end of that, staff will make a decision and council will have an opportunity then to engage the public after the decision if we like. And that's not our last order of business because this is not the state telling us what we have to do. This is FEMA. So, yeah, so Carter and Suzanne get to now talk about something that luckily is not nearly as difficult for us as it is a lot of our fellow cities, particularly those on the coast right now, are really struggling with this new process. So we'll get a little bit of education from Suzanne.
All right. Yes, thank you, Mayor, for that introduction. This is a time-sensitive issue, so I apologize for the longer agenda, but it's one of those things that we need to address with a deadline. So this next work session, we're going to switch gears to talking about floodplain issues and what the FEMA requirements are for that. So they are passing down some new regulations as it applies to development in floodplains. And they've set a deadline of December 1st for Oregon cities that are affected by this to respond. So I'm going to run through kind of a high level review. I just want you to know that this is not going to be the last time that you hear about this information. Yay! Oh, well, I know, right? Maybe for some that are going off council, but we're going to have more work sessions on this. And, you know, we even have a chance to kind of modify the direction we go based on new information. This is a very fluid situation. These are rules that are
issues. Yes.
Oh, dang it. I didn't even know I had a pun going there. It's getting later. So the information is coming down pretty fast and changing quickly. So we're doing the best with what we have with information at hand. And so I want to run you through kind of that background information of why we're having this discussion, talk about what your options are, and then talk about what action we're going to do. So with that, I've got a couple slides just to keep me on track here. So like a lot of new legislation, this comes by way of a lawsuit. Why we're looking at this, and it goes all the way back to 2009 when FEMA was sued by environmental advocacy organizations, saying that the flood insurance program was not properly vetted for any environmental impacts to fish species. Specifically, we're talking about salmonoid habitat. And that therefore it's because that FEMA didn't consult with the National Marine Fisheries Service. It's violation of the Endangered Species Act. And whoop. Oh, okay. I don't know how to fix that. Okay. We've got tech support. Carter to the rescue. That's weird because it's showing up on that one. We'll go to the go-to meeting. Yeah. Well, easier to see. Oh. It's there and gone. Is it working on your screens now? Still can't see it? Oh, okay. All right, good job. Here we go. No? Oh, as once I start advancing it, for some reason it's bouncing off. Okay. Oh, there.
And I don't care. Carol and Roxanne, what we're facing is the screen we're all seeing will not advance through the slides. There is a TV set up here that will advance through the slides. So we are going to look at that. You won't be able to see it, and we will get you the slide deck.
That works for me. Are we gonna get the slide deck later, or is somebody gonna send it to us now?
We'll have to send it at a later date. There's only 9 slides, and I'm really just doing a high-level overview of the points that are in the staff report. So I apologize for that tech glitch.
Okay.
But there's not a lot of words on those slides, so I'm just going to kind of follow through those. But
Mayor, actually, I'm gonna log off. I'm fading pretty fast here. I tried to hang in there. My cold medicine is kicking in, so I'm gonna have to go.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Belzer.
Thank.
Okay, we're ready to continue. So as I mentioned, there was a lawsuit, FEMA needing to consult with National Marine Fishery Services, and that led to that consultation happening in 2016. The National Marine Fish and Wildlife Service said that, yes, there are potential impacts to endangered salmonoid species as a result of floodplain development occurring, and they issued a biological opinion that spelled out recommendations for FEMA on how to handle that. So between 2016 and 2023, FEMA was going through a process of reaching out to the state agencies such as Department of Land Conservation Development, Fish and Wildlife Service to develop some of the tools for local governments to amend their ordinances and start following these new rules. FEMA then started an environmental impact review. Some may know that as the NEPA process, where they have to do an environmental impact statement before they adopt new legislation. On the heels of that, in September of 2023, FEMA was hit with another lawsuit from the environmental organization saying that FEMA was too slow in implementing the National Marine Fish and Services biological opinion. So that kind of brings us forward to just recently this summer, July 2024, when FEMA announced, because of that follow-on lawsuit, that they were taking too long, that the way they were going to handle that is by requiring local jurisdictions affected by these requirements to adopt what are known as short-term interim measures while FEMA was going through the rest of the environmental impact review process and developing the long-term changes. So FEMA gave cities 3 options, and we're going to talk about those. Federal agencies are rife with acronyms, so I'm going to go through with what we're all calling as PICM are those short-term actions. And the cities need to report on which of the 3 implementation measures we're going to do by December 1st. So those 3 options include the city can adopt a moratorium on any new development in the floodplain. So pretty big drastic measure to stop all development while these rules are being determined, but would certainly stop impacts to fish habitat if there's no development happening on there. But that can affect a lot of things like infrastructure projects and other types of development gets defined pretty broadly in floodplain management terms. So some concerns about that one. The second option is to adopt FEMA's model code. So as part of this process, FEMA has developed model code language that would fit into our floodplain ordinance that takes into account those what we call mitigation measures from the National Marine Fish and Wildlife Service. So they had things like replanting trees or using impermeable or permeable pavement surfaces that will help cut down on those environmental impacts. The third option FEMA's outlined in these pre-implementation or pick-em auctions are to do a permit by permit habitat assessment. So that's kind of the case-by-case approach of each development that occurred in the floodplain. They would have to do one of these habitat assessments to determine if there's any impacts and then what they're going to do to mitigate so that there's no net loss in habitat. So it's not saying you can't develop in that floodplain area. It's just saying you need to consider the impacts and offset those somehow. So as you can imagine, local governments are struggling with these measures. A lot of them have not been vetted, and there are issues with them. So if cities do not pick one of those three implementation measures, then they're automatically kicked into the permit by permit interim measure. That's what they default to. So we have heard that from FEMA. FEMA is also requiring, as part of these pre-implementation measures, that cities begin gathering more data on our floodplain development permits, and that'll start this January 2025 with the first annual report being due in January 2026. So some additional reporting requirements going along with this as well. And as I mentioned, this is Oregon. We have Oregon land use law. So the concerns that I've been hearing on all these webinars that have been coming out with FEMA and the outreach that they're trying to provide in implementation is just these measures require most jurisdictions to amend their code. And then, oh, by the way, there's usually a 6-month process or more to amend our code. So there really wasn't a realistic timeline. There are issues with this model code. It hasn't been vetted with our state land use representatives to meet what we call clear and objective standards. So we have state laws that say if we adopt standards, they need to be, you meet them or you don't. They can't have a lot of discretion in them because that can slow needed housing development down. So some real concerns causing a lot of angst out there with planners, with attorneys, with the governor's office sent a letter to FEMA. And unfortunately, FEMA's not backing off of the December 1st deadline. Again, I think it's the pressure that they're getting. But they have provided some more guidance, and there certainly are a lot of larger cities, especially that have full-time floodplain administrators they're doing the research, providing the feedback. LOC, League of Oregon Cities, has been very active in this process. It's my understanding there'll probably be another counter lawsuit to this, but the bottom line is that we're needing to take some kind of action to report to FEMA of what we intend to do, even if we have to go through a code change process to get there. So apologize for some of the formatting, got all wonky when it came into this computer, but of the slides. Question you may ask is, how does this impact Monmouth? Well, luckily, unlike some cities, I'm thinking like Sheridan, even Independence, they have much more floodplain properties in their cities. And yeah, I feel for them on December 2nd, how they're going to be handling some of these. We don't get a lot of, we maybe get 1 to 2 floodplain permits a year. Some years no floodplain permits. because these are really our lands on the north side and the south side of town associated with North Middle Fork of Ash Creek and South Fork of Ash Creek. So a lot of that is where our sewage lagoons are, Gentle Woods Park, some of those areas south of Hoffman and east of 99 that haven't developed, or they're in a conservation easement, thinking of the Fisher properties that are in a conservation easement. So, that's kind of the good news. But we do have land that we've counted, in our buildable land inventory. And I just totaled up a really rough back of the envelope calculation of those vacant parcels with development potential. And we have about 200 acres between residential, industrial. So we're talking real impacts to our land supply. You start asking for a biologist to do a habitat assessment as part of a new development subdivision application. There's money and expense that's going to add to the cost of development, especially in a time when we're very sensitive to adding more costs for housing development. As I'd mentioned, the infrastructure concerns. So, we do have master plan roads, sewers, waters that need to cross some of these at some point to make a efficient and a coordinated system. But there are, to be fair, there are definitely positive impacts and environmental benefits of having greater protection of that riparian zone along these creeks that will benefit habitat protection and flood reduction. So, and I think that's been the message coming out from the state agency level as well. Like, hey, we know there's some good objectives that overlap with other agencies like DEQ and DSL and the whole alphabet soup of state agencies that deal with these properties. But what we're saying, these rules need to be coordinated and follow, some of the rules already in place. And I think there's a real feeling that the risk is kind of being pushed down from the top to the local governments. And that, if we start adopting moratoriums and regulations that take away property rights, who do you think gets sued at that point? It's the local government and jurisdiction, not necessarily FEMA. And by the way, we have notification requirements. If we're adopting more restrictive land use measures, we have to do what's called a ballot measure 56 claim. That's a 30-day notice before we adopt those decisions. So luckily, I think FEMA is hearing some of those concerns, and they're feeling like their hands are tied. They have told cities, at least communicate with us. That's the big thing. Don't tell us you can't do anything or not going to do anything, that you're just kind of basically ghost them and blow that off, hoping that it will go away. So communicating like what our intended implementation measure is at this point in time, and then explaining a timeline for how we're going to get there. So at this point in time, staff was recommending this permit by permit approach. I think just because of that model ordinance has not been vetted. I think if we can get to a model ordinance that meets our state laws, that's generally the best way, I think, to go. And obviously legal can weigh in on that as well, but it's kind of like the safe harbor. So I do think we will get to that point, and I think we can kind of have this interim permit by permit and then get to a model code and having some code amendments. But so that's the action, if you will, that we need to get through tonight. And like I said, this was a pretty high level overview, and I do apologize in that it's hitting you at this 11th, 12th hour of the decision-making process. Know that you're not alone. Lane shared Dallas's example. I've been talking to independents. It's all over the listserv. Like I said, Carter and I have been going to hours worth long of webinars with FEMA. So we're certainly following all along, and it is, changing. But if we don't respond, as some jurisdictions are, electing to do, then FEMA has told us they're the first jurisdictions that they're going to reach out to on community visits. And really, they want to encourage to work with them and pick their implementation measure and try to provide the resources. So they haven't left the communities necessarily completely high and dry. Ah, I got that one. That was intended, yeah. Get a little later in the night.
Madam Mayor?
Right. We wouldn't be here.
Yes, Count Lane
Yeah,
Shetterly.
thank you, Suzanne. It was a good presentation. So, you know, Dallas last night adopted sort of the permit by permit. Their response is going to be, we really don't know what's going on here. We think we're going to do permit by permit. And this has put cities in a really difficult bind. I concur in Suzanne's advice that the model code is to be avoided for now. You do not want to do a moratorium that defaults to the permit by permit. That will get you off of FEMA's naughty list. And then I would say, find a good place in the middle of the crowd and just move along, not to be the first person through the gate, not to be the laggard, but this is all going to take shape. Also in the change of an administration in Washington, and who knows what the new FEMA's attitude toward this is going to be. Plus, you've got litigation that will be forthcoming, that this goes beyond what the what FEMA is required to do. So between those political changes in DC, litigation that could further clarify or muddy the water on this, I think the thing to do really is just what Suzanne has suggested. Take that permit by permit option for now, and then just wait to see what happens next. It's a mess.
Counselor McKeel.
Yeah, I think let's just get this off our plate. So I would like to propose the motion.
Thank you.
I move to direct staff to respond to FEMA by the December 1st, 2024 deadline. The city's intention to implement pre-implementation compliance measure option 3, permit by permit approach.
And I would note that an 800-pound gorilla sleeps wherever
Can I
it
get a
wants
second?
to.
Can I
and
get a
would
second before additional discussion? Thank you.
Yes.
All right, moved by Counselor McKeel and seconded by Counselor Oberst. And again, if we have one of these come up and we explain to developers that they're now going to have this added requirement, even though it's not our code, that we're sorry, but everybody's going through it, right?
Yeah, and I think just to clarify, FEMA has told us if it requires, because there are some communities that have said that they believe they can get there without a code amendment, and I don't know how their code must be written different than ours, but even to require that habitat assessment plan really takes a code amendment. We can't just ask an applicant for studies when it's not in our code. There's another Oregon state law. But FEMA has told us if that's the case, communicate with them, give them the timeline, and that kind of gets us in the middle of the pack of the.
Once you've made the decision December 1st, the next deadline, January 1st, is to gather information. There isn't a hard deadline at this point for when this actually has to be implemented. And that's going to be the part where FEMA is going to have to work with the cities to clarify that. They're going to spend the next year calling all the cities that haven't even responded. So I think this will roll out slower and probably slower as time goes by.
So it doesn't affect anything that's like right now in process. We have.
Not necessarily for us, but there are definitely properties impacted, subdivisions that we're planning on doing a little bit of fill in the floodplain. FEMA's kind of halted some of those review process. So we don't have anything right now, but we definitely have properties that will be impacted by that. So.
All righty. Counselor McKeel, hand up again. Hand down.
No, sorry, I forgot to take it down. I'm sorry.
All right, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Oh.
Great, this one I wasn't as worried about. Okay, thank you very much. That's what we'll tell them, that's what we'll do. Yeah, and be glad we are not my friend, the mayor of Warrenton, and we're not my friend, the mayor of Toledo, and we're not my friend, it is rough out there. This is a big topic of conversation. All right, I will ask for brief reports. And again, actually, my mayor's report, I will defer so that we can get through these. Reports of boards and commissions. I just want to echo the Minnet conversation. Oh, sorry. Oh, fix the stream. I see. When they can hear us but not see us, maybe.
Actually, we see mostly a black screen, but all of your faces are along the top.
Oh, okay. So that's fine. You can, since they can see what we see on the screen is what's, that's what's going through the GoToMeeting, not what's on the YouTube though, not on the live stream. Oh, there we go. We're back. All right. So reports, boards, and commissions. I want to say there was a Minnet board meeting, and as reported, they have made their payments for their December debt service. They also do an inventory each year to say how many properties, how many places are there in the service area where they could be hooked up in the what we call the legacy market, which is the Monmouth Independence market, and how many of those properties are vacant, how many of them are Minnet, how many of them are hooked up to something else, and how many of them are not hooked up to any kind of internet. And that has stayed steady, even though we do have a little bit higher vacancy and we have actually some increased competition. I don't know if we're all getting it, but we do have Spectrum moving into our community pretty heavy. So the fact that we're staying steady and not losing folks is good at this point, but it's something they're really keeping an eye on. That's my Minnet board report. Phyllis, Councillor Lopez was out of state on work and did submit a statement regarding a couple of his appointments. I want to have Phyllis just read those to us.
Okay, the Parks Board received, this is Park and Rec, Park Board received an exciting presentation from Woo Campus Recreation. University is opening their facilities, aquatic center, climbing wall, lower courts, and indoor track and racquetball courts to the public. Membership syncs up with the 10-week academic terms, and the price of membership begins at $80. I'm excited to see the university exploring creative ways to open their doors to the community without competing with local businesses. And then for the Mid-Willamette Valley Homeless Alliance, Elaine Loser, I don't know, our executive director gave the board her resignation effective December 31st. We are grateful for her good work and service to the organization and appreciate the advance notice she provided. The board decided to form a subcommittee of the ORS 190 entity, which Monmouth has representation on, and the executive committee to determine an approach to hire an interim. Some board members suggested exploring alternate organizational structures during this transitional phase. The board's goal is to hire an interim before Elaine departs. That's all.
Great. Thank you for sharing those. Councillor Oberst, Board Commission report.
Tree Board had a special meeting last Thursday. We have a single tree for our fall tree planting this year that will be going into Madrona Park. And this is a tulip poplar that's being donated by Kathleen Blevins, who's a Monmouth native. Her mom was Monmouth's first librarian. It's to be in honor of her brother, Grant Gillis. And Grant and Kathleen were both Central High School graduates. So we have a nice connection there. This will be Saturday at 10 o'clock in Madrona Park. We also had a special meeting of traffic safety. We asked ODOT for a speed study on South 99. They finally got around to it. They gave us the results. We asked for the 45-mile-an-hour zone to start at the south edge of the Mar Brothers property, and for it to drop to 30 at Gwynn Street, and they said no. And despite the fact that we pointed out increasing traffic, especially coming out Gwynn Street, their data showed that the highest speed at Gwynn Street leaving town was 62 miles an hour. The highest speed coming into town was 61, something like that. 3/4 of all vehicles south of Gwynn Street were in violation of the speed limit. And as their position is, guess you guys got to enforce better rather than giving us relief in the form of decreased speeds. Our consultant also suggested we might push harder for a radar feedback sign to remind people to slow down as they approach Gwynn Street. So that is a likely outcome. We had a choice of appealing this, going with the ideas from our consultant, or accepting it, and the Transportation Commission voted to accept. So this is the speed study we've got. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, yeah. And Counselor McKeel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The library board had a meeting last week, and just really good news. The CCRLS, our consortium of libraries, purchased T-Mobile hotspots, and Monmouth has 5. So patrons can actually check them out so that they can get that internet. Only adults can check them out. They get checked out for 3 weeks. They can be renewed if it's available. And there's no late fees, but if it gets broken, it's $198. So it's a good deal if you're careful with it. Also, the season of giving is starting up, and we pull that up. From November 6th to December 18th, there's a Casa Giving Tree where people can get a tag and bring back an unwrapped gift for a kid in foster care in Polk County. There's a community food drive, and we're also doing the warm coat and blanket drive again in the library. And then just next week is the holiday for folks, and the library will be closed on Thursday and Friday, and will reopen for regular hours on Saturday, November 30th.
Great. Thank you very much. And Counselor Salinas Oliveros.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Really quickly, arts and culture, a tiny art show is coming up in January, so please mark your calendars for that. It's a partnership with the library. The call for artists is out on a website under Arts and Commission, and there's no deadline at this time for those submissions. What we're trying to do is have a calendar of artists for 4 different rotations for the whole year. So if you know of anyone who's interested, who's an artist in our community, please direct them to the website to complete the call to artists. And Melody Barrett on our commission was the one who created that form. So we're excited to start that process. And we will be discussing the budget at our next meeting. And I did attend the Indigenous Artist Talk, Steph Littlebird, at the Monmouth Library. I believe it was last Saturday. Really a great historical talk, and she actually is part of the Equity and Inclusion Board at the Salem Art Association. So it was really nice to have that, and the Independence Museum lent us some of their artwork that's on yard signs. This is Kalapuya land, so that is also out in the library. So our next meeting is Thursday. It's a full meeting, and you'll hear all about it in December. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Nothing. All right. That takes us to our city manager report. Rochelle Roden.
Hello, thank you. So when I started on July 8th, the City Hall project had 26 open building permits and a punch list of over 400 items. We are down on Thursday, last Thursday, we received our final building permit and we received our occupancy. And as of today, we have 3 items on the punch list, of which 2 will be done this week. And the other one is the lighting, just doing the finishing touches on the lighting, and the vendor is coming back on December 9th. So we're very excited about that.
Great.
And this lighting is not because of a problem with the lighting. There was a choice to dim the lighting to be able to see the screen.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, it's other lighting stuff around, and like when it comes on and off, it's very complicated, this lighting. So we're getting educated on it. But anyway, so very excited about that. In regards to the trolley, I wanted to give you an update. So the 3rd trolley is still not operational. I had reported last month that Hometown Trolley had found the equipment. They were getting it shipped to them. They would then be sending someone here to fix the 3rd trolley and replace the chassis. They did purchase the equipment, but when the equipment got to them, it was the incorrect equipment. So they are back to trying to find the equipment. Because we've, the trolleys that we have, we're wanting to change the CAD software on there and the app and all of that process. So we need to be able to pull the trolleys offline. And so we discussed hiring a bus or renting a bus that we will use as the 3rd trolley, and then also use when we need to pull a trolley off. So we are currently working through getting that and getting at least, and Chariots will operate that bus as well. I scheduled a meeting on Thursday this week with the Independence team so we can talk about signage and we can talk about social media campaign and how we're going to communicate to the riders so that they understand this bus is. I was like, can we paint it red? No, we can't do that, but we can make sure that everyone understands that this is actually the trolley until we get the 3rd trolley running. I did put in about the trolley funding update, so I'm just going to cover that one more time. So we are being recommended for state transportation improvement fund dollars for the FY 25-27 biennium in a total of $1.5 million. And that's 4 different sources. We're very, very excited about that. So when I say recommended, that is what the STIF advisory committee is going to recommend. That is what the Chariots board is going to recommend. It all has to be submitted to ODOT and then they will award in March. But we are very excited because hopefully this will cover our operational costs for FY 25-26 and give us about $400,000 going into 26-27 that we'll have to offset and start figuring out how we're going to raise those funds. But very excited that we got a piece of the pie. Our October newsletter had an open rate of 75%, which I am told is the highest rate yet. So we are very excited about that. The Monmouth Police Department is in the process of doing background checks for 2 candidates. This would be for the CSO position and for officer number 15. So we're just waiting for background checks to come back. On February 4th, our financial auditors will be here to present the FY 23-24 financials. A population study, Portland State University has updated our population estimate to 11,516. And we'll be publishing this after the new year. Basically, I was going to say this, but births are decreasing and deaths are increasing, which is not a great way. And I typed it, but when I went to read it, that doesn't sound great. But that's kind of what's going on in the world. For DEI training, the Senior Center will be hosting a Diversity 101 workshop with Dr. Jacqueline Cares Hurley from Western Oregon University. That'll be December 5th and 9th, and it's from 1 to 4 p.m. I have asked the management team members who have not participated in the JEDI training to please attend that training, and then all of the volunteers for the Senior Center will also be attending that training. I also wanted to let you know that I'm now on the board of the Monmouth Independence Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also on the board for the Friends of the Visitor Center. So that we've had board meetings. I've had quite a few. And then I just wanted to let you know that on for next week, I'll be on vacation Tuesday through Friday for the Thanksgiving holiday. And that's all I have.
All right, that takes us to council comments and announcements.
If you haven't checked out the Safe Routes to School, you should. Church Street's mostly done. They're going hog wild along Sacred. There's work to be done on Jackson, and then there's Heffley, and finally we'll pick up the stretch alongside Maine. One interesting piece, I noted that the project was slated to end at the south side of Madrona, but if we were to extend on the east side of Heffley, one more property, we would be connected with sidewalk on one side of the street all the way to Gwynn Street. And so I drew this to staff's attention, and guess what has been poured? So we will now have connection all the way from MES to Gwynn Street on at least one side of the street. So, yeah, and you know, I don't know if this was the very best way to do it, but it was a way to do it. We had the folks on the ground, they were mobilized. It was a straightforward dig out and fill. So, yeah, looking forward to it. I hope they come back and start cleaning up after themselves a little bit. They're like me, they're leaving little details to do in their projects, and they need to come back and wrap it up, but it's looking really good.
Counselor McKeel, I see your hand up, but we've lost maybe your videos. Oh, here we're back. Okay, good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just, I was actually going to make the same comment, Councilor Oberst. I was so excited to see that Heffley Street section go in, and kids are on the sidewalk all the way through. So I was very excited.
All righty, and I guess that will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to go home.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody.